Advertising Council Australia would like to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which we broadcast today. ACA would also like to acknowledge their culture of storytelling through art, dance and music, and we pay respect to the elders past, present and future on other lands throughout all communities who might be participating today.
Good morning and welcome to the launch of the Create Space Report and Action Plan. I'm Tony Hale, CEO of Advertising Council Australia, and I'm delighted to be joined by Rose Herseg, President of WPP Australia and New Zealand. Morning, Rose.
Good morning, Tony.
This is a really important day for the industry and an important day for the Ad Council. The industry's always been reliant upon an inclusive nature to a diverse range of people. Creativity needs different viewpoints, different values, and different cultures. But we also need to ensure that everyone is welcome, respected, and a safe working environment is provided. There's been lots of opinions floating around about the state of the industry, but if we're to develop effective strategies grounded in data, we need the data in the first place. It's for this reason that almost 12 months ago, we contracted Kantar to run an Australian version of their international D&I survey. We need to benchmark our industry internationally, and we need to benchmark our industry in Australia. So Create Space was born, and the survey was completed by over 2,600 people, in fact, in December. In the main, the results are really good. We're largely a very diverse industry with the vast majority of people having a high sense of belonging and experiencing low levels of discrimination. We benchmark consistently with the global advertising industry and favourably when compared to other industries. On the surface, we're actually in pretty good shape. But dig into the data a little bit more, and it doesn't take long to find the industry has some blind spots. We all know about the mental health issues, but some people don't feel valued, listened to, or respected. And an alarming number of people are considering leaving the industry. For an industry to be truly inclusive, it needs to be inclusive to everyone. Not most people, all people. So we need to embark on a never-ending journey to ensure everybody is treated equally and feels equally valued. It's also no secret that the industry has had some black spots, particularly with respect to sexual harassment and even assault. It's reprehensible that the victims aren't treated with decency and justice while the perpetrators can go on to build their careers unimpeded. The industry is better than that and needs to be better than that. While we can't isolate ourselves from society, we can set our own standards. The only thing that will prevent sexual harassment is an industry culture that simply doesn't tolerate it. From today, we must draw a line on the past and set new standards for the future. But to be very clear, today is just the starting point. There's no finishing line. We must be restless and relentless as we strive for a better industry and be conscious that the job will never be complete. And there's a lot more about that later today. I must make some special mentions. Hannah and the small, dedicated ACA team have done an unbelievable job living and breathing Create Space over the last 9 to 12 months and getting us to this point. Ably assisted, of course, by our D&I committee. Lorraine Djokovic has chaired that committee for many years, and we're indebted to her support and wise counsel while serving on the ACA board for what seemed like a generation. And more recently, Rose Herseg joined the board and immediately volunteered enthusiastically to chair the D&I committee. And personally, I can't imagine a better or more appropriate successor. And it's now, I'm going to hand over to Rose, who has the honour of launching the Create Space report and action plan. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you, Tony, and good morning to everybody who is dialing in and listening to this incredibly important census presentation. I too would like to acknowledge the team who have done an amazing job, the D&I committee and Lorraine Djokovic in particular, who really played a key role in chairing this committee and the important work. Second, I'd like to thank Kantar for creating a really sound methodology and an honest survey, allowing respondents to answer openly. But most importantly and finally, I'd like to thank everyone who took part in the census. It's only with people in our industry responding to the survey that we can gather significant, meaningful results. As Tony said, we received over 2,600 responses, which have been analysed and benchmarked. Via an anonymous open link, we asked respondents to share their characteristics and their experiences at work. Now, respondents could choose to skip any question they preferred not to answer, but overall, we saw very high participation rates across the survey. The Create Space report examines our industry through various lenses like gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, social mobility, and age. The report also uncovers behavioural norms like everyday exclusion and barriers to reporting. Now, today we are going to be focusing on 3 actions in our Phase 1 action plan: female talent, mental health, and microaggression. Now, there will be more action to come over the next 12 months so that every single stripe of diversity is addressed. None of this means anything unless we can all act. And that's exactly what the Create Space report is all about. A meaningful and measurable plan for our industry to act and to be truly accountable in providing a diverse and welcoming workplace for everyone, so that nobody feels excluded and nobody is left behind. Hannah Sturrock is our National Head of Engagement for the Advertising Council of Australia, and Catherine Robinson is a Senior Director of Kantar. These women will now take us through the results. Over to you, Hannah and Catherine.
Thank you, Tony and Rose. And thank you to everyone who took part in the census. It gave us a really rich data set to work with as we researched and designed a holistic approach to inclusion and diversity in the industry. Catherine and I will present some of the big themes now. We'll keep it top line as there's so much juicy stuff in the report and I don't want to ruin that long read for all data lovers out there. So go ahead and download the Create Space report from our website after the webinar to really get under the skin of this wild and slightly dysfunctional industry of ours. So on to the results. We were really thrilled to get 2,652 responses to the census. The total potential audience for this census might be around 10,000. So this is a significant and representative data set. Compared with the Australian workforce, we're unsurprisingly younger, we're more female and more concentrated in New South Wales and Victoria. 90% of responses came from people working in agencies, and more than half of responses came from people working in creative and client management roles. But there was a good spread across levels. We weren't just interested in representation. We wanted to dig into how people felt about their experiences at work. Our focus was really on inclusion. Catherine.
Thanks, Hannah. So the inclusion index that Kantar has created is something that we have developed and use across many markets across the world. Inclusion is central to the study. So we have the inclusion score that we've built this around. We'll keep referring to this throughout the presentation. Now, this score is calculated by asking questions about people's sense of belonging at work, the absence of discrimination, and presence of negative behaviours. These three pillars combine to form an overall inclusion score out of 100. Kantar has used this in many markets, so it's a great benchmarking tool.
So our overall industry inclusion score is 62, which is pretty good when we compare ourselves to the Australian norm at 43. This was last measured by Kantar in 2019 using exactly the same index methodology. You'd expect us to be better than the average Australian workplace, but there is always room for improvement. Kantar has also run the same methodology in advertising and marketing industries globally with the World Federation of Advertisers and with the Advertising Association in the UK. Looking at our inclusion score again, we are on par with all markets, but lagging slightly behind the global average and the UK and industry. And we would really prefer not to lag behind the rest of the world. The Inclusion Index also allows us to benchmark our industry with other industries using global scores. And again, we're near the top of the pile. So, on face value, we're not doing too badly. Overall, we've mostly got good relationships internally, with 75% feeling a strong sense of belonging to their company, and 90% saying that they're a valued and essential part of their direct team. We look after junior staff who have the highest inclusion scores, and most employers are actively trying to be more diverse and inclusive. Overall, we've got a fairly good representation of ethnicities and sexual orientations in the industry, but there is an undercurrent of discontent and exclusion, where experience divides and inclusion drops. 1 in 5 people say they're likely to leave the industry due to a lack of inclusion or discrimination they've experienced. Our job now is to recognise and acknowledge these pockets of difference and take action deliberately and consistently. So Catherine's going to walk you through with me the main research findings.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm really excited to share key learnings today. Now, the census covered a lot of ground, and here's an overview of all the topics we explored. Today, though, we'll look at the key themes that emerged. We've structured the results by different segments and groups of people to make it easy to understand and address. Now, we'll zoom through these to keep up a pace, so hopefully the data-averse people out there don't zone out. But for those fellow data nerds out there, don't panic if you don't get it all. The report will be available. Now, we'll be looking at experiences of different groups of people, for example, by gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic background. But it's important to remember that there are many intersections between these groups. We know already that people from minority or marginalized groups are more likely to face discrimination. And so those identifying with 2 or more groups are likely to face even more challenges. For example, the people who reported the lowest sense of belonging and the highest career challenges tend to be women from an ethnic minority. Today, though, since there are almost endless permutations in these intersections, we'll zoom in on individual dimensions for clarity's sake. But we cannot overemphasize that in reality, many people face multiple challenges just as a result of who they are. We'll start by looking at gender. Now, we know, of course, that responses to a gender question may reflect a combination of gender identity, expression, and/or experience. Now, our survey uses gender self-identification data. So when we say women, we're talking about those who identify as female. So we are a majority female industry. women account for 60% of respondents in our survey, with 39% men and 1% non-binary or gender non-conforming people.
The good news is that over the last decade, the industry has made great progress in recruiting more women into the workforce. Today's stat of 60% is much higher than data from 2013, when we were 53% female and 47% male. So we have successfully recruited more women into the industry. To ensure this data was accurate, though, we also cross-referenced the split with Advertising Council Australia's member base, and we are similarly female skewed at 58% women and 42% men.
What we see here are the inclusion index scores by gender, and there's a notable difference. So, despite being a majority female workforce of 60%, we see a much lower inclusion score for females and for gender non-conforming people. In our study, gender attracts the most discrimination compared to other individual factors such as ethnicity, physical ability, or sexual orientation. This strongly impacts the inclusion score that you can see here.
So there is clearly a difference in experience here, despite females being in the majority. The next question to ask is whether women are represented equally all the way through the industry at all levels.
Here we have the male to female ratio across levels of staff, and there is evidence of a retention issue for females. In junior roles, we start with almost 70% female employees, but this drops to 46% at executive management level.
And again, we cross-check this with ACA member data, and this gender representation curve is consistent. Our members' national senior management profile is also skewed 60% male, 40% female.
A popular misconception is that female representation at senior levels will simply catch up in time. However, gender disparity will not be a self-correcting process where more mid-level women gradually progress to senior roles. This is because this cohort also has the highest risk of leaving the industry. We may be employing more women, but we're less successful in recruiting and/or retaining women all the way to the top. Our data also shows that there is still a gender pay gap in the industry. Now, it's fair to say that no pay gap measure is perfect, as reflected in the different measures you can see here. However, the overarching story is that however you choose to look at it, the gap is real.
Yes, this is such a critical measure for everyone in the industry to engage with. The gender pay gap measures the difference between the average earnings for women and men in the workforce. We ran a gap analysis with ACA's latest member salary survey, and we found a gender pay gap of 21.6%. And we could see that that ranged from 4% in account management to 22% in creative. So the data clearly shows that gender inequality exists in our industry. But we wanted to also look at what the blockers might be to women progressing into senior roles, as tackling these will improve retention and progression and help to close the gender pay gap. One indicator was around caring responsibilities. We found that 56% of women with children believe parental leave has negatively impacted their career progression. So what is a key milestone in many women's career journeys is also retarding promotion and pay. This is a key issue for our industry and one we need to address if we're to make an impact on representation and inclusion.
Another blocker for females is the high prevalence of negative behaviour experienced at work. This ranges from the more subtle through to the extreme. For example, women are far more likely to be interrupted or spoken over unfairly in meetings. 17% of women have been made to feel uncomfortable at work because of who they are. 25% have been bullied, undermined, or harassed. And 8% have experienced sexual harassment at work in the last year. The lower inclusion score for women is largely dictated by this factor, and this will pop up again later in our presentation.
So where all this leads to negative behaviour, parental leave, stalling career progression, a gender-based pay gap, a lack of senior female role models, is that a large proportion of women are likely to leave the industry as a result of their experiences of negative behaviour and discrimination, and far more than men. We're looking at around 25% of mid-level women versus 10% of men. This is a stark data point that highlights how many women in our industry are feeling. However, it also helps to clearly direct where we need to take action as an industry.
The next section is related to gender, age. 74% of our sample are aged between 25 and 44. But gender representation is not evenly spread across these age groups. Over 60% of our female sample are aged under 35, and the drop-off from 35 onwards is pretty stark. Now, this is often the watershed age when people decide whether to commit or change industries based on their experience to date, or based on their observations of the experiences of other women at this point in their careers. Here, we have the proportion of people of different ages experiencing negative behaviour at work. So the same sorts of behaviour we discussed in the gender section. Now, we appear to be nurturing newcomers, but the 25 to 44-year-olds encounter far more demeaning behaviour at work, and this drives lower inclusion scores for this mid-career group.
So we see both inclusion and diversity take a dive, especially when we turn 35. Well, there's an optimistic slogan for you. But seriously, though, the engine room of our industry is showing signs of strain, mentally and emotionally. Many of this cohort are our ambitious females who are starting to reassess their career options if they're thinking about maybe having a family. We need to provide more incentives to stick around and build a long career.
We also looked at our data through the lens of ethnicity. We explored ethnic diversity by looking at how people self-identify, using comprehensive lists of ethnicities aligned with what the Australian Bureau of Statistics uses. Now, most of us, 62% in fact, identify primarily as Australian, so there's your togetherness. But we allowed people to select more than one ethnicity. So it's great to see that overall, our workforce is ethnically diverse, and with a distribution broadly similar to what we see in the Australian population. Note, however, that the ethnic majority come from European origins. So to be blunt, people more likely to be white, with our ethnic minority group including many other ethnicities. Only 1% of the industry identifies Aboriginal, Torres Strait, or other Indigenous Oceanians. This compares with 3.4% of the Australian population and 2% of employed people as measured in the last 2021 census. We see far fewer people from ethnic minorities in senior roles. So, beyond recruiting people from ethnic minorities, we need to address the issues that are impacting our ability to retain them. So diversity is not translating into inclusion. Unfortunately, we see far more experiences of discrimination and negative behaviour amongst those identifying as ethnic minorities. And unsurprisingly, this leads to a much higher likelihood of leaving the industry. So a strong signal here as to where the biggest gaps in our 75% belonging score may come from. Now, when thinking about discrimination based on ethnicity, remember our earlier discussion on intersectionality. We cannot ignore the fact that the experience of negative behaviour worsens when someone from an ethnic minority also belongs to other marginalised groups, based on gender, sexuality, or disability, and so on. One example, 23% of women in our sample have experienced gender-based discrimination or negative behaviour at work, but if they're a North African or Middle Eastern background, it jumps all the way up to 32%. So this can be called the double jeopardy effect.
We asked people in the census to share their physical and mental health conditions with us. We discovered some surprising results.
58% of our respondents have an ongoing physical or mental health concern, and that's higher than the national figure of around 49%. Of particular concern is the 28% of respondents with a mental health condition. That's also higher than the Australian average. Now, not surprisingly, from what we showed you so far, this was highest amongst females, gender non-conforming people, and those under 35. We also saw high levels of stress and fatigue. Now, the census was conducted at the end of 2021 after a traumatic year. So this is a score to monitor over time. But as things stand, so far 2022 isn't shaping up to be so great either. We discovered, though, that people with health challenges also report more experiences of negative or demeaning behaviour compared to others. So a much lower inclusion score of only 45 reflects the burden felt by this sizable cohort of people. Another factor to consider is that 1 in 3 people are not reporting their physical or mental health condition. Now, while no one should feel obliged to talk about their health issues in the workplace, it is indicative of an insufficiently supportive environment when so few people speak out about their challenges. So we face a dual challenge here, creating an environment where people feel safe to disclose what they're dealing with, as well as addressing negative behaviours towards a cohort who already have a lot to contend with. It was positive to hear, though, that when people do share their condition with their employer, the majority of them report feeling really supported. So this tells us it's imperative to create a safe space for open dialogue around physical and mental health challenges.
So the census revealed that 1 in 5 people with a health issue will leave their company due to a lack of inclusion. More than half the industry belong to this cohort, so this might mean losing 10% of your team. But they're not talking about it, at least not to you, which makes supporting them a whole lot harder, but not impossible.
Now, unlike our Australian national census, we asked people to share their sexual orientation with us, which they kindly did. We have 17% of people identifying as LGBTQI+. That's pretty similar to our Australian population. We were surprised to learn that despite being an industry commonly characterised as fairly open, almost a third of our LGBTQI+ respondents choose not to disclose their orientation at work. We see here that the inclusion score drops for this cohort compared to hetero people. This is driven by the high incidence of negative behaviour experienced at work. Just one example of negative behaviour reported by LGBTQI+ people is that 30% of them have heard complaints of being too politically correct. That's versus 18% of straight respondents. Now, looking at LGBTQI+ representation at different levels in the industry, we see that the numbers steadily decline with seniority, with only 9% of C-suite or executive leadership respondents identifying as LGBTQI+. That's well below the overall Australian population at 16%. So this lack of representation does not go unnoticed.
That's right. 1 in 3 LGBTQI+ people say they don't see people like them in leadership. Considering the strong representation in our sample, a lack of leadership role models combined with everyday negative behaviour is a disincentive for a group of people that should be totally at home in our industry.
The last grouping we're going to look at today is socioeconomic diversity and mobility. The data shows that our current recruitment supports some, but not a lot of social mobility. Our employees are more likely to come from privileged backgrounds. Far more come from professional middle-class families, whilst people from other backgrounds are far less represented. Now, when we think about the role this industry plays in representing brands and products to consumers, having a good representation of people from all walks of life is really critical. People who went to private or fee-paying school were also overrepresented at 54% versus the national average of 35%. Now, looking at this by seniority, the proportion of people from fee-paying schools is much higher amongst younger staff. So what that means is that the more junior we go, our socioeconomic profile is increasingly different to our Australian population. And this indicates that the privilege gap will just continue to grow in the future.
Yeah, this is a complex challenge. In an industry where entry-level roles are often low paying, a certain level of privilege and family support is needed in order to be able to afford to enter the industry. Another barrier is our high reliance on freelancers, which presents a lack of financial security and stability for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. There's also a geographical barrier, with the industry concentrated in the two most expensive cities in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne. Your background shouldn't determine your future, and yet for too many people in our society and our industry, it does.
Now, across diversity verticals, there are some broad themes that characterize how this industry perceives and reacts to negative behaviors and discrimination. Remember that one of the key drivers of inclusion is the experience or non-experience of negative behavior at work. Our census recorded significant incidents of these behaviors, ranging from microaggressions through to physical or sexual harassment. Now, there are certain groups who experience the most negative behavior at work: females, non-binary or LGBTQ+ people, people with physical or mental health issues, and Asians, North Africans, and Middle Eastern people. So, double jeopardy means that microaggressions and harassment come on top of the oppression they're already facing due to who they are.
This high incidence of the everyday microaggressions is a big red flag, as these types of behaviours are often dismissed as part of our colourful and relaxed industry culture. It's a relatively new term in Australia, at least, so we wanted to give you a little bit more info on what these microaggressions are. Microaggressions are the everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviours that communicate some kind of bias towards historically marginalised groups. Microaggressions may seem less serious on face value, but due to their frequency are cumulatively as damaging for those who experience them daily. We saw a very high overall incidence of microaggressions in our industry. Some of the examples that we saw are on this slide, but a few other examples that I'm going to throw in there because you might recognise some of these. Asking or expecting female employees to tidy the meeting room, get coffees, buy gifts, or organise celebrations. Looking at your phone while a colleague is talking. Assuming an older colleague isn't able to use or learn to use a technology. Sidelining pregnant women or new mothers, assuming they aren't focused on or committed to work and career progression. Telling neurodivergent people to be less sensitive or more sociable. The first step is to recognise these types of everyday exclusion and classify them as real and really damaging if normalised and dismissed. However,
one of the most striking learnings in our survey was how seldom negative behaviour and discrimination is being reported. For example, only 51% report bullying and 36% report casual discrimination. The main reasons for not reporting are shown here. Low levels of reporting indicate an industry culture of not rocking the boat and cynicism about the issue being taken seriously. So whether it's fear of impact on one's career or just not knowing how to raise an issue, all these behaviours can be addressed by senior people via communication of policies and improved reporting channels and leadership behaviour. So those are the key headlines we wanted to share today. There's a lot more detail in the Create Space report we're ready to download today.
Thank you, Catherine. And before we get into the action plan, which I know everybody's eagerly waiting for, I wanted to share sort of 4 themes from this study that stuck with me. And, you can tell me later if they resonate with you. So firstly, negative behavior and microaggressions are the silent assassins, underreported and dragging our inclusion index down. Females and gender non-conforming people are feeling this acutely. Secondly, double jeopardy. If you feel oppressed belonging to one marginalized group, consider those who belong to 2 or 3. Inclusion efforts can often translate to promoting more white females or males from ethnic minority groups. But queer females or people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who are also from ethnic minority groups, they've got much more to push through at work. The third theme, leadership role models matter. Technical diversity based on loosely calculated percentages might work in an awards submission, but it doesn't translate to real inclusion. If the C-suite is a homogenous group, there is work to be done to convince people that they could one day be part of that club. And fourth, between the ages of 25 and 34, some big decisions are being made about whether advertising is the right choice. Decisions are made based on subtle factors like respect, recognition, levels of everyday stress, and levels of pay. A career must look and feel sustainable at this age. Sustainable, not tolerable. So those are kind of the 4 things that have really stood out for me during this amazing project. And with that, I think it's time to bring Simon Wassef into the discussion. Hello, Simon.
Good morning, Hannah, and thank you, Catherine, as well. And good morning, everyone who's watching. I think the first thing to say is thank you for tuning in, and thank you for taking the time to participate in the census and to be here. I think hopefully now you can see, and you will continue to see, how important your voice is and how your voice helps us turn data into action. Let me start by saying, I'm going to do a quick time check. Have I got time? Yes. I know how you feel. It's a lot. And there's some big headlines in there, and there's a lot to solve, and it feels like a mountain to climb. And I know, because I feel the same way. But the good news about mountains is that you can climb them, and you just do it by taking steps. So without doubt, there are a lot of you watching right now whose companies, or you are in groups yourself, who are already working on some of these challenges. It's not the first time we've seen a lot of this. You're working on that stuff, and that is brilliant. Some of you may be thinking that you knew intuitively a certain issue was there, but you didn't know if everyone else felt the same way. And some of you may be surprised or disappointed or a bit angry at what the data is telling us. And that's all part of it. That's now the job is, to get on with encouraging the entire industry to raise our collective standards. And we're going to do that with our first 3 steps. So very deliberately, let us be really clear. This is phase 1. And as Rose said at the top, there is a lot more action that we can take, and we will take them. Rose talked about how many angles we have to come at this conversation. Inclusion of people with disabilities, inclusion of Indigenous talent, inclusion of gender non-conforming people, greater diversity at the C-level, bringing more socioeconomically diverse talent even into the industry. We will develop actions against all of those challenges that the census has showed up. But today is just about the first 3. The strategy guy always needs to have 3. Can't be more than that, otherwise we can't sort of concentrate on what to do. So we're focusing on these 3 areas, and for a couple of reasons. Basically, these are areas that affect a lot of us all right now. They're areas that have huge scope for improvement, but actually in doing it can be done quite quickly. And they're areas that once we get some solid foundations down, it will give us insight and learnings for future actions. So let's get into it. Action number 1, probably not a surprise from a lot of the conversation that's just gone before. We are going to really tackle gender inequity. And an action here is designed to improve the experience and retention of female and those who identify as female talent.
Yeah, this shouldn't be a surprise after what the census showed. The key areas that we're going to focus on are, first, ensuring the industry is a safe space for everyone, particularly females. We also want to focus everyone on developing and promoting better gender-neutral parental leave policies. And we also want to drive widespread awareness of the gender pay gap.
So within there, we want to improve the experience for talents. Action number 2, improve the experience for talent with mental health challenges. So our industry, we've talked about this a little bit. We've made a lot of progress in the mental health conversation, but there's room to double down here and focus on increasing not only awareness of mental health challenges, but support for people with mental health conditions.
And action 3 is to address microaggressions for everyone to thrive, particularly marginalised groups. Our focus here is primarily on turbocharging awareness, as this will help to reduce the incidence and increase reporting rates, which will in turn increase our overall inclusion score from 62, because, you know, we don't want to be at the bottom of the ad inclusion ladder, people. We don't want to shuffle into respectable 3rd place here.
And then we were introduced to microaggressions formally a few minutes ago. There's probably a lot of people on this call who knew that to be true, maybe some who didn't. Now that we know what we're looking at, it has a name, we can address the problem, and we're going to talk more about microaggressions shortly. But for action 1, we're encouraging all employers to re-look at, update and republish their D&I policies with microaggressions now as a focus, increasing awareness of how and when to report them at work. So let's go a little bit deeper here on action 1. We heard a quarter of female mid-level talent are saying they're likely to leave the industry due to a lack of diversity and inclusion. So that's, I mean, a quarter. Look around you. You know, these are our colleagues and our friends. This isn't a nice to have. You know, this is an industry that is majority women, and yet a quarter think that they could walk away. That says it's a critical business issue for every single company in this industry. We now know that women are 6 times more likely to experience gender discrimination. Over a third of mothers face obstacles in career growth. Part-time work has impacted the career for half of women. A quarter have felt bullied or undermined. 8% of women sexually harassed in the last 12 months. And we talked about the double jeopardy effect for ethnic minority women. That's some stark reading. I mean, what are we talking about here? We are talking about systems, structures, norms, behaviors that ours and most other industries are built on. And language alert here, we've created a bit of an institutional clusterfuck for women. That is the fact. That is what the data is telling us, and we can't abide by that anymore. And I think the important thing here to say is it's not a zero-sum game. Creating a better environment for one gender group does not hinder others. We know that all the boats rise when women are better represented at all levels and their talent is nurtured, retained, and frankly, remunerated at levels commensurate with their experience and quality, unhindered by old models that essentially penalise women and people who identify as women. And vitally, understanding and tackling one of the biggest insights from the census. So you saw that double jeopardy effect impacting people who belong to more than one marginalised or minority group. For women of colour, or for people who are part of the LGBTQI+ community, double jeopardy is real. It has a name, we can see it and rally against it.
So action 1 covers 3 key areas: safety, parental support, and career progression and pay. To drive progress that we can measure at the next census, we're asking the industry to take 3 specific steps. Now, the first step for all of us, tackling sexual harassment and victimisation. To get started, download the Create Safe Space Toolkit from our website and follow our 6 steps to creating an industry culture that rejects harassment in all its forms. Now, there has been a lot of interest in this action, so I wanted to provide a bit more detail on the Safe Space Plan. Sexual harassment is not an issue that can be eliminated with policy alone. Resolving it requires both internal and external commitments to review and reshape cultures and practices to ensure all staff are protected. Our toolkit sets out some of the foundational aspects to adapt and build on. The toolkit has 6 actions for businesses and 1 action specifically for Ad Council. Firstly, shine a spotlight on the issue of sexual harassment, what it looks like today, and prepare staff to deal with disclosures at work with our background fact sheets on tackling sexual harassment at work and a trauma-informed response guide based on guidance from the Respect at Work report and the Champions of Change Coalition's Disrupting the System initiative. These fact sheets include links to further resources. Second, self-assess your current policies and knowledge. Our Watch Workplace Equality and Respect self-assessment tool is a good place to start. It will prompt reflection on the leadership, strategy, and norms of your business to determine your progress towards meeting their 5 workplace equality respect standards. Third, develop and share a standalone sexual harassment policy that responds to current issues and working styles. We have included explicit clarifications that should be incorporated. Fourth, develop or review your formal whistleblower policy or informal whistleblower plan and make it publicly available. Our fact sheet includes answers to common questions and guidance on covering sexual harassment in your whistleblower plan versus your grievance policy. And this fact sheet includes links to asset guides, checklists, and there's even a chatbot in there and webinars on handling reports. ACA members can also take advantage of our Safe Space Foundation program that we've developed in partnership with leading employment law experts, Danny King Legal. Fifth, read our FAIR NDA fact sheet and review your understanding and use of non-disclosure agreements. Consider adopting Champions of Change Coalition's principles on transparency and confidentiality. And 6, review and launch or relaunch your employee assistance program to increase avenues for reporting and advice. We have an excellent solution that we're rolling out to ACA members, combining clinical support, emergency care, and holistic case management. And there's a 7th step for ACA members, which is stay in touch with us, because we are integrating these Create Safe Space standards into our new agency accreditation program designed to set and assess minimum standards for the industry. So download the toolkit from the website and get started on this action right now.
Okay, second, we're asking the industry to work towards gender neutral parental leave policies, as well as integrating return to work support. Some of you may be thinking, what is gender neutral parental leave? Well, that is a world in which we don't assume women are primary caregivers for newborns. It means that parents are able to choose or change who the primary caregiver will be at any time in the first 12 months of the baby being born, as opposed to it always being the woman. So some of you may be thinking, I didn't even know that was a thing, or that it was possible, or, don't know if we can do that. It was a bit of a blind spot, certainly for me. And I think it's something that you look at and go, is that now we know how much, the sort of penalization of women who choose to have children is having that effect in that middle management cohort that we saw. This is a chance to address that. So as part of this action, we're asking agencies to consider whether the company offers gender neutral parental leave entitlements. Does the organisation make any contribution to superannuation while individuals are on parental leave? And does it consider workers on parental leave for promotion?
And then the 3rd step, we want the industry to engage proactively with the gender pay gap issue. The first step in addressing the gap is to assess the situation with a pay audit. And we've shared 2 guides to support this. Once you've established if a gender pay gap exists, then ask these questions of yourself. Do you really support flexible work arrangements for men and women beyond the option to work from home or 4 days a week? Do you publish a salary range on job advertisements? Do you ask people to disclose their previous salary in interviews? And are leadership roles designed exclusively for people who work full-time?
Okay, on to action 2, and that is to improve the experience for talent with mental health challenges. So we said before, no one should feel obliged to talk about their mental health issues, but it's indicative of an insufficiently supportive environment when so few speak up about how they're feeling. I mean, we now know nearly a third of us are affected by a mental health condition, which far exceeds the Aussie population. A quarter of us reported being affected by ongoing stress, highest among those with carrying responsibilities and tending to skew female, the middle managers and junior staff, and a perceived lack of emotional social support at work doubles among respondents who have mental health conditions or experience ongoing stress. We now know mental health conditions are highest among gender non-conforming respondents, females and respondents aged under 35. And we now know that low levels of reporting suggest that there is still a social stigma surrounding mental health and talking about it. This is such a widespread issue. I don't think there are many of us in this webinar even who haven't been affected by mental health issues or have close colleagues or friends who have been affected by mental health challenges. We know what it is, but we should all be way better versed in what to look for and how to respond. So the industry ask here really is, how can we benefit from overt communications that say it's okay not to be perfectly okay, that mental health issues and illness should not be treated as a burden or hidden away, and that everyone will get the support they need to flourish.
Yeah, this action applies to so many of us in the industry. Long hours, tight deadlines, loose role definitions, they're not really conducive to healthy heads. The census has again demonstrated that mental health and ongoing stress need more explicit attention if we're to reduce churn rates and increase inclusion scores. So we're asking the industry to take 3 specific steps to help people with mental health challenges feel seen and supported by their employers. So first, read, sign and share Mentally Healthy's minimum standards. Signing the minimum standards is your opportunity to make a statement and show your people and the industry your commitment. There are more resources for individuals and employers on their website too. Leaders should talk openly about the minimum standards to destigmatize and encourage transparency.
Second is, it's there on the screen there, we can't fix what we can't see. So we want to close that gap around disclosing challenges at work. That's partly fueled by a lack of confidence in how that conversation is going to go. We don't know how it's going to sort of end up. So are we really willing to go into that conversation? We're asking the industry to educate staff using Are You OK's practical workplace guide to spotting the signs, asking Are You OK? And not for nothing, responding with compassion when someone says, no, I'm not. And then providing more avenues for support at work. And that's critical. So we're asking the industry to become mental health skilled workplace by training a percentage of staff in mental health first aid and undertaking actions to encourage open conversations. The Mental Health First Aid Workplace Recognition Program celebrates organisations across Australia who invest in developing mental health first aid skills in their people and acknowledges their achievement and commitment to embedding MHFA training in their organisation's culture through actions like senior leadership support, relevant policies, and supporting mental health first aid officers. Okay, action number 3, microaggressions. We talked a lot about them, but we're going to keep talking about them because it's such an important undercurrent to so many of the results that we've seen. So let's address them. We're going to address microaggressions at work for everyone to thrive, but particularly marginalised groups. So this action is designed around recognising and reducing the rising incidence of negative behaviour, especially those microaggressions. And I ask everyone on this call and more broadly, first, we have to know, not suspect, but know they are real, and we have to classify them as important.
Yeah, they may sound mini, but the impact is mighty. The census demonstrated how widespread these everyday exclusionary behaviours were. Microaggressions have been experienced by almost half our sample, driving that lower overall inclusion score. 46% of people have been unfairly spoken over in meetings, 1 in 5 have been called out for being too politically correct, and 1 in 5 have been undermined at work. But we also found reporting levels were very low, a sign that we do not really yet understand the impact of microaggressions. In many cases, seemingly benign behaviours like interruptions and being called too politically correct, they're not really enough to raise red flags with HR, but the effects can compound and compound until employees feel disrespected, undervalued, and discriminated against. The ultimate result is low morale, poor team performance, and a diminished company culture. Allowing microaggressions to fester will undercut your company's DEI and I strategy.
So one of the challenges is that people believe the issue won't be handled well. So if only around 1 in 3 of us are raising issues, they felt like it was addressed satisfactorily. So that means a vast majority of us think that the opposite is going to happen, or we're not going to bring it up because we're not sure what's going to happen, or we're going to be asked, are you sure? Maybe you misread it. Maybe they didn't mean anything by it. That creates that vicious cycle where microaggressions are just normalized in the industry. And I think this is important to just pause here for a sec. We've seen this. We have all done. I bet there are people on this webinar right now nodding, going, I've done the secret eye roll, or I've grinned and bared it when I witnessed a microaggression or when I was a victim of one. And I had a feeling, I didn't know what it was. I walked away thinking, what just happened? There are people who are probably nodding right now going, that happened. It's not just you. You didn't imagine it. It's a real phenomenon. And recognizing that sits at the core of driving change. We can't fix it if it's not acknowledged to be real. And when we know what we're looking for, we can see those microaggressions and we can act to mitigate them. So action 3, I've got 2 minutes, I'm going to get there. It's designed to bring awareness and understanding to the presence of microaggressions to encourage considered reporting and a management response. So while we said a lot of it comes from a place of ignorance, not malice, sometimes it does come from maybe a sort of more deliberate place, but a lot of the time we don't know even that we're doing it. So, I've certainly committed them in the past. I'll put my hands up and admit that, because I didn't even know what they were. So educating everyone about the adverse impact of mental stress that comes from microaggressions is critical.
Yes, so we're asking everyone in the industry to take 3 steps. First, educate yourself and your team on what constitutes a microaggression by downloading our field guide, which includes definitions and resources to share internally to raise consciousness. Secondly, to encourage more conversations about microaggressions and increase self-awareness, we're asking everyone to explore and contribute to the Micropedia of microaggressions. The Micropedia aims to collect everyday microaggressions and highlight their harmful impact through real-world examples.
And then lastly, we're asking the industry to contribute to and build a culture of allyship where we intervene on behalf of our marginalised colleagues. So the census showed us that many of us had observed microaggressions at work. Even if we ourselves hadn't been the victim of it, we saw it. Well, guess what? That's where you can become an ally. And allyship is the kryptonite to microaggressions. Again, look around you, look at the colleagues next to you. They are your potential allies. You are a potential ally to the person next to you. So you can raise awareness of the different types of microaggressions and remind us that anyone can unintentionally commit them. So to that end, there is an extra download with 5 allyship actions to get you started. And I encourage you to look at that after the webinar. But the one big thing we can all do from right now is in the room, look around you. Is there someone at work in that meeting who is the only one who looks like that? The only woman, the only person of color, the only disabled person? Your allyship could probably go a long way to ensuring that microaggression doesn't bring them down or make their voice go unheard.
Yeah, being an ally is something every single one of us can do today and every day. So these are the first 3 actions for the industry. 1, address gender inequities and improve the experience and retention for female talent. 2, improve the experience for talent with mental health challenges. And 3, address microaggressions for everyone to thrive, but particularly marginalized groups.
Okay, so there you have it. Thank you again, everyone, for making your voice heard, for taking part in the census, for coming this morning. Our actions, I hope you will see, are a direct result of what you have told us. So now let's hold ourselves accountable to that. Engage with the action plan, have the uncomfortable conversations, take ownership of issues you'd like to own or like to see change in your organization. Attend upcoming webinars, and there's going to be a few of them, upcoming webinars and working groups, and create space for the culture and behaviors you want to see in the industry we love.
Creating an inclusive culture is not the sole responsibility of HR. They are a critical and brilliant partner. Nor is it the responsibility of the individuals within your organisation with lived experience of discrimination or prejudice, though their experiences are vital when devising strategies and solutions. Anything fundamental to the happiness and productivity of your people is a leadership issue, and anyone can be a leader when it comes to diversity and inclusion. You can download the full report and access the first 3 actions at createspace.org.au. We will be running online interactive sessions on all of the first 3 actions over the next few months, so look out for those. We'll also continue adding resources and training options to the hub too, as the program continues to evolve and gain traction. Thanks again to Catherine and Kantar, to Simon and the rest of the D&I committee, past and present, and for everyone who's supported Create Space over the past 6 months. Create Space is more than a survey. This is our industry's rallying point to shake things up around a brand platform that is open and fun and friendly and safe. It's about changing beliefs and behaviors that don't feel good anymore. It's about seeing beyond our own biased perspectives and appreciating where privilege might cloud our view of what's fair or most important. Accepting that change is possible and needed is the essential precursor to everything. We must create space in our industry, in the boardroom, in the work, and in the conversation. It's not scary if we all do it together. Thank you for tuning in to Create Space TV. We'll see you next time.